like to call again the Board of County Commissioners meeting to order. This is our Wednesday session. It's Wednesday, March 12th, 2025. We have ahead of us a couple of really great work sessions that I'm excited for. So let's get right to it. Jared Bowder, if you don't mind introducing your crew, and you can start anytime you want. We're ready to hear.
Yeah, good morning, Chair, Vice Chair, Commissioners. Thank you. Again, for the record, I'm Jared Bowder with Lane County Planning. Today, the project management team for the Eugene Urban Growth Strategies project have prepared a work session update and a presentation for the board. The Planning Commission most recently received a similar work session presentation on December 17th of 2024, and prior to that on May 21st of 24. There's currently no ordinances for adoption tied to the project, and we've carved out about 30 minutes for presentation and 30 minutes for questions and discussion. And with that, I'll turn it over to Terry Harding to kick off the presentation and further introduce the city staff with us today.
Thanks, Jared. Morning, everyone. Again, I'm Terry Harding, and I'm the city's principal planner for community planning and design team. Today, I'm joined by Rebecca Gershow and Leah Roush for the presenter portion of today. We also have Alyssa Hunter, planning director, and Heather O'Donnell, senior planner, to answer questions when we get into the discussion. So, let's see if this works. Oh, maybe the wheel. There we go. So the agenda for today will provide background on what's included in urban growth strategies. And then Rebecca will highlight the comprehensive plan work. And then Leah is going to walk through the new rules for housing planning in Oregon and the types of actions that Eugene will need to take to meet our housing needs. And we'll finish by previewing the topics that staff are planning to bring to you over the next 2 years. And although we'll have plenty of time for questions and discussion after the presentation, we may need to come back to you at a future date depending on the nature of your questions. So with that, let's begin with what is urban growth strategies. This project is identifying the tools, actions, policies, and land needed for the next 20 years to support living wage jobs and housing that everyone can afford. It builds off years of planning and community engagement through Envision Eugene, and this project will evaluate the need for housing, jobs, parks, infrastructure, and schools, as well as what tools can help Eugene grow more efficiently. The work will result in studies of what land is available in Eugene, updates to the Envision Eugene Comprehensive Plan and our land use code, a new land use designation map, and an evaluation of whether there is a need to expand the urban growth boundary, which we do expect there will be, but that's the last step in our process for accommodating our land needs. To guide this work, the Urban Growth Strategies project team has established 6 goals. They cover planning for all income levels, facilitating more housing and fair housing outcomes, and supporting data-informed policy decisions about urban area growth. Also, to provide meaningful community engagement opportunities, center the voices and experiences of people from underserved communities, and as always, to comply with relevant state statutes and administrative rules, of which there are many, and some of them are still being written. Wake up. Urban growth strategies include several phases. The first is community engagement, where we will identify the needs and priorities of community members for housing, jobs, and access to community assets in Eugene. This has been ongoing for over a year. Next is the policy development phase, where we will integrate the results of community engagement and technical analysis to create and update the policies guiding land use planning in Eugene. Then there's the housing and jobs actions phase, where we identify actions to take to address the identified needs, especially related to housing production, affordability, and choice. And lastly, the land supply studies phase, where we will complete a technical analysis of land needed for jobs, housing, and other urban uses, such as parks, schools, and infrastructure. We'll touch on the first 2 phases today, and then spend the bulk of our time on housing needs and actions. We will plan to come back to you as needed on the first 3 topics, as well as in a couple of years to talk to you about the land supply studies. This overwhelming timeline is in your packet, so you can refer to it later. There's a lot going on here, but for simplicity, we start this timeline in 2025, although, as I mentioned, the work started last year in 2024. A significant amount of engagement to inform our proposed policies and actions, and the 2 updates to Lane County Planning Commission that Jared mentioned. Basically, the planning work that's underway here is leading to a 2026 adoption package, and there's some dark green bars lining up in 2026. There will be another adoption package, including the land supply studies in 2027, and a third in 2030 to adopt any necessary UGB expansion, although that work starts several years earlier in 2027. So briefly, here's a peek at some of the community engagement that is underway. Our community engagement plan, which was approved by the Eugene Planning Commission, includes a variety of integrated tactics and activities, both general in nature and focused to specific communities. Many of these are underway, with more coming over the next 2 years. And coming up next is a lot more engagement, including launching our equity advisory panel this month. And now I'm going to hand it to Rebecca, and she'll go over the policy development.
Thank you, Terry. Good morning, commissioners, staff. Thanks for having us. Again, I'm Rebecca Gershow, senior planner. I'm going to talk about the work underway on our comprehensive plan. As I'm sure you know, historically, Eugene, Springfield, and Lane County have shared a regional comprehensive plan for the metro area known as the Metro Plan. And over time, both Eugene and Springfield have been developing our own local comprehensive plans to provide land use policy direction within our separate urban growth boundaries. Because of the work involved in moving from one comprehensive plan to another, the Envision Eugene Comprehensive Plan is being developed in 3 phases. The first phase was adopted by the board and city council with Eugene's urban growth boundary in 2017. It included chapters on the UGB, economic development, transportation, and administration and implementation. And now we're working on the second phase. This is scheduled, as Terry pointed out in our timeline, it's scheduled for completion in 2026, with the last piece actually scheduled for completion in 2027, when the Eugene City Council and Lane County Board of Commissioners will consider these new chapters that we're working on for adoption. So these 6 chapters cover community engagement, compact development and urban design, housing, community health, land use, which is primarily our land use designation map, and the last chapter is public facilities and services, which will also include a Eugene-specific public facilities plan. So using what we've learned from extensive community engagement, we're still on this slide, that's okay. Starting with our Envision Eugene process and current engagement and research, we're drafting goals and policies for these chapters and the draft map to inform and support the urban growth strategies work that we're going to be talking about today. And phase 3 will come to you at a future date, and it will include our natural resources and community resilience chapters. That will be the last phase. So I want to spend a minute on the land use map, or our parcel-specific land use designation map. It is, as I said, the focus of our land use chapter. We provided the Planning Commission with this information plus a bunch more technical details, but I will just highlight that the land use map depicts our long-term vision of a property's use. It's different but related to zoning. And because the Metro Plan diagram that you can see here on the left is not property specific, it creates some uncertainty for property owners and developers and staff who are processing applications and doing long-range planning work, and it ultimately leads to more time and cost for development. So we're modernizing the map, and it will replace the Metro Plan diagram for the area inside Eugene's urban growth boundary, similar to what Springfield did last year. This is a modernization project. It puts the map in GIS, so it'll be interactive and accurate and accessible to the public. It'll help us with development of our buildable lands inventory, which we'll be talking more with you about coming up. And it'll remove barriers for development because there will be more clarity and fewer questions. And this draft map is available now for review on our project webpage. There are links in your memo that we provided if you're interested in digging in and getting more information on any of this work. So quickly, this winter and spring, we're almost at spring now, we're rolling out each chapter's draft goals and policies for public review. Chapter 1, community engagement, is currently available for review on our webpage, and our housing and compact development and urban design chapters will be posted and starting to distribute and share with the public next week. As Terry mentioned, we're going to be meeting with a variety of groups with our engagement that we're continuing. We're going to be sharing these draft goals and policies widely, and then we're going to be coming back to both council and the board this summer to share this work with you, share the input that we've received, and talk more about how the comprehensive plan policies can provide support for our urban growth strategies work.
All right, thanks Rebecca, thanks Terry. Good morning Commissioners, again my name is Leah Rausch, I'm also a senior planner in the city's planning division. So for the rest of our presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about the new framework and legal requirements for housing planning in Oregon and how we'll implement that through urban growth strategies. I'll also talk a little bit about the types of actions that Eugene and Lane County could consider to meet our local housing needs. I'll try to navigate in 2 places. Okay. So as I'm sure you all know and have heard, the legislature advanced a series of priorities related to housing and specifically planning for housing, one of which that I'll focus on is called the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis, or the ONA. That was part of the 2023 legislative session. I'll walk through the components of this framework and how we'll implement it locally, but before I do that, I just kind of want to underscore how different I think the conversation is about housing right now across the state. At the state level, the rules guiding how we plan for housing and Goal 10 of the land use program are being rewritten, and the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis is really a new paradigm for how we do this at the local level. Locally, Eugene and Lane County have been taking significant actions to address our local housing needs. You all approved an affordable housing action plan a few years ago. We co-adopted urban reserves in 2023 to make our expansion process more efficient. And then in Eugene, we've established an affordable housing trust fund and invested millions of dollars in affordable housing projects. We've also recently invested in new infrastructure to unlock housing development in the Crow Road area. So as a city and as a state, we're all working within a different landscape than we were a decade ago when we last did our urban growth boundary analysis planning. And we know that housing is a fundamental need, and our severe housing impacts all of our work every day. So I think it's helpful to kind of keep that in mind as we get into the framework itself. So diving into the ONA, the first step in this process is that the state is now allocating housing need to urban growth boundaries. So using a new ONA methodology, the state will allocate a 20-year housing need to each city, as well as an 8-year production target. So next in that process, cities over 10,000, including Eugene and Springfield, will complete a newly required analysis where we'll localize and add context to that need. That's by housing types, characteristics, and locations. Next, and a step that may be familiar, is the housing capacity analysis. So we'll be updating this analysis that's focused on the city's land supply and our capacity to accommodate that 20-year housing need. But concurrently, we'll work on what's called a housing production strategy. This is a newly required action plan that will identify and prioritize new actions that meet our housing need and help us to further fair housing choice. And finally, the ONA program establishes a housing acceleration program. So this is a new state program that ensures that cities over 10,000, including Eugene and Springfield, comply with housing planning requirements and make meaningful progress towards meeting our local housing needs. Importantly, the ONA also sets an 8-year planning cycle. So we'll take up this work on a much more regular basis and update our housing planning every 8 years moving forward. So kind of digging into that first step in the process, that state allocation of our local housing need. Our new need is based on a pretty complex methodology that determines the entire housing need for the state and then allocates that need to each region and then further to each city or each UGB. The new approach considers both our future need, which includes our projected population growth, and that's really what we've planned for in the past. But the ONA newly considers changes in household formations and planning for units that have been lost to second and vacation homes. The ONA also newly considers our current unmet need, so that accounts for decades of underproduction of housing, as well as permanent housing needed for people experiencing homelessness. The state allocated our local housing needs on January 1st using this new methodology. And Eugene now will need to plan for roughly 26,000 new dwelling units over the next 20 years. And to put that number into perspective, I think we all know it's a big number, but we have around 90,000 dwelling units in Eugene today. So that means we're planning to increase our housing stock by roughly 30% over 20 years. So to dig into those numbers a little bit more, it's a big number. How does it compare to what we're actually developing on the ground right now? So to meet our more comprehensive housing need, Eugene will need to produce 70% more units annually for the next 10 years as compared to the last 10 years. So using data from our growth monitoring program, we know that Eugene saw an average of about 960 new dwelling units per year over the last decade. Of those, about 100 each year were subsidized affordable housing. To meet our new housing need under the ONA, Eugene should really be seeing closer to 1,600 units per year over the next decade, including closer to 700 that are affordable to households with the lowest incomes. To look at it one more way, This graph also uses our growth monitoring data, and it shows net new dwellings from 2013 to 2014, so kind of our 10-year trend. This gray line shows our currently adopted needs, so from our current housing capacity analysis, where we were planning for about 755 new units each year. This blue line shows actually our average production since 2013, so we're exceeding that adopted need. We're at about 960 new units per year over the last 10 or 11 years. And the green line at the top shows our new housing need through the ONA. So that, again, requires annual production of about 1,600 new units over the next 10 years. So I promise this is the last slide of data. In addition to giving us that overall 20-year need from the state, the ONA also segments that housing need by affordability. So this chart breaks down those 26,000 new dwellings into affordability bins that are based on area median income. So on the far left in green are new units needed for households with the lowest incomes. The bars in green are units needed for households making less than 80% of median income, which is typically a level of affordability that can only be provided through subsidized affordable housing. For a household of 4 in Eugene, this group is earning up to about $67,000 per year. Next in black is our need for moderate income housing, which is households earning between $67,000 and about $107,000 a year in Eugene. And finally, on the right is our need for market rate housing, which are households earning more than $107,000 per year. So there's a lot of data, I recognize, but the bottom line really is that we have an immense need for housing in Eugene and across the state, and especially housing that's affordable to those with the lowest incomes. We're also seeing, as you all know, declining federal resources for affordable housing, and the funding we do have isn't going as far. So while this new approach is more reflective of our true need, I think it highlights some of the challenges we have ahead. So taking it back to that ONA process and that framework, the next step in our process is to connect that 20-year need to people in our community and their unique individual needs. So we'll need to plan for housing that's affordable to people with all incomes, advances fair housing choice and mitigates fair housing issues, and provides for adequate housing diversity and choice through a range of housing types, characteristics, and in needed locations. Next step in our process is one that may be familiar to you all, which is our housing capacity analysis. And so through this analysis, we'll assess our current land supply and how much of that land is considered to be development ready. And then we'll determine how much of our housing need can be accommodated on our current land supply within our current urban growth boundary. So to break that down a little bit further, we like to say this is kind of the bean counting step. We'll demonstrate how we'll accommodate our 20-year housing need through first our existing capacity within our current urban growth boundary. So that's on vacant and partially vacant land as well as through redevelopment. Our new capacity, next is our new capacity within our current urban growth boundary, which we'll do by taking actions to increase the expected capacity of new development. And then finally, our remaining need will be accommodated through an urban growth boundary expansion. This process is sequential as required by state law. And I've outlined in black the step of finding new capacity within our current urban growth boundary, which we'll talk a little bit more about later in the presentation. So I mentioned, in addition to ensuring we have enough land supply to accommodate our housing need, we're also newly required to create an action plan to meet our need, which is the housing production strategy. The housing production strategy will prioritize new actions to increase housing production, affordability, and choice. We must also identify and proactively address any fair housing issues. So that housing production strategy, let me back up. In addition to our 20-year housing need, the state will also give us an 8-year housing production target. It's this target that we must take actions to address and against which our progress will be measured. So the plan itself can include a variety of actions to meet our need, and I'll review these categories at a very high level today. So again, I've referenced this a couple times. We'll need to take concrete actions to meeting our housing need, either through finding more efficiency in our current land supply or taking other actions to increase production, affordability, and choice. Some of these actions are tools for the city to advance. Other actions may impact unannexed properties or would otherwise be implemented in partnership with Lane County. So kind of the first category, we could advance actions that provide information to the public to encourage housing production, affordability, and choice. Things like more community education on housing options, expanding our pre-approved plans program, or initiating education and outreach about voluntary annexation. Another category, we could take action to reduce regulatory barriers to housing production. So that's things like code updates to support specific housing types, auditing our land use code to identify and address barriers, or otherwise modernizing our development standards. Certainly, we could advance actions that increase the capacity and efficiency of our current land supply. So those are things like surgical code changes to ensure more efficient development, targeted rezoning and redesignation of properties, or supporting housing around mixed-use centers. We also think we'll likely need to adopt new or expanded financial incentives to target local housing needs. We could do that by affordability, so tools that incentivize moderate income, mixed income, or affordable housing, tools that encourage housing in specific locations, so continuing to encourage housing in centers and along key corridors or through voluntary annexation, for example, or by housing type. So, for example, encouraging smaller housing types. In the final grouping, we can certainly increase direct investments in housing or infrastructure that supports housing. Things like looking at new revenue options for income qualified housing, land banking efforts to acquire land for valuable housing projects, infrastructure investments to support infill development, or street annexations to support voluntary annexation. Again, just as some examples. So with that, I will hand it over to Terry to wrap us up.
Take a deep breath. We're almost done, and we're looking forward to your questions. But just to give you a sense of what is coming next, we will outline what topics we expect to bring to you over the next 2 years or so in 3 kind of chunks or packages of actions. We expect to move forward, as our timeline showed, with 3 adoption packages. In 2026, we expect to bring you the first adoption package, including the comprehensive plan chapters that Rebecca talked about, the land use map, and a first round of housing and jobs actions focused on reducing known regulatory barriers to housing production or to increase capacity on our current land supply. Then in 2027, we'll bring you the second adoption package, including our residential and employment land supply studies, as well as more housing and jobs actions. And throughout that time, we'll be working on the next steps for UGB expansion analysis, which we'll bring to you for adoption by 2030. And the next slide shows where that might happen. Remember, a later phase of our work will focus on UGB expansion, and in considering where to do that, we'll first look to the urban reserves. So those are the areas on this map in orange that were adopted by the county and the Eugene City Council in spring of 2023. Urban reserves are county lands identified for future city urbanization, or the areas we would expand our UGB into incrementally. We'll have to identify which area or areas best meet our remaining land need, but generally we would consider areas closest to the UGB first. This is a very prescriptive state-directed process, and the good news is that the state rules are being updated and hopefully will help make it more efficient to expand. And we've already done a lot of good pre-planning work through the urban reserves process. Later this year, we'll share with you updates on our community engagement, the new Envision Eugene Community Comprehensive Plan chapters, and land use designation map, which will come for adoption in 2026, as well as our initial set of housing and jobs actions. So we expect that we'll have a summer work session with you on these topics probably in August, if you meet in August. And with that, we're ready for your questions and discussion. Thanks for your attention. There's a lot to unpack.
You certainly hit that nail on the head. Thank you very much. Good work, everyone.
Someone
think they've had their hand up the whole time.
Yeah, looks like Commissioner Farr, you were minimized on the screen, but your hand is up, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Lovell, and thank you for this marvelous presentation. I love working with the City of Eugene's planning staff, particularly as it evolves and develops new strategies that we can all get behind. You know, we've progressed significantly beyond the initial stages of the Envision Eugene process that told us we didn't need any extension of the UGB for residential purposes. I think it's clear that we're looking at all means to expand our ability to provide housing. I have noted one thing that you said earlier. It's the plan will remove barriers for development by providing more clarity. I think everybody's going to welcome that, and I'm looking forward to Lane County working very, very closely with the cities of Springfield and Eugene as we move forward, providing the what you described as decades-long underproduction of housing in our community. I just have a quick question. I apologize for not being there in person. I wish I were there in person. I'm necessarily here today, but my question is regarding the 26,000 new units that are being projected for in 20 years. Seems like a large number. 1,300 a year seems like a much smaller number. How does that cover the decades-long underproduction of housing?
Yeah, that's a great question, Commissioner Farr. I don't have those numbers off the top of my head, and Heather can help me here, but current unmet need is certainly incorporated into that 26,000 new units. I believe about half of it, I'm looking for you,
Was under production,
was from underproduction.
about a third, but they haven't
About a
given us
third.
the new breakdown.
We think, we're waiting for the kind of specific breakdown from the state of how many numbers fit into those different buckets I went through, the current unmet need and our projected future need. But from the draft numbers we received as part of this process, about a third was coming from unmet need through underproduction.
With the decades of underproduction, about a third of that.
Yeah.
So we presume, you know, we received a presentation near the Board of County Commissioners earlier this year that regarding the fact that we've been underproducing about 1,200 units a year. So we're falling behind by 1,200 units a year. We're talking about adding 1,300 units a year for the city of Eugene. And I'm curious, you don't need to answer this right now, but how do those numbers match up? The fact that we have been underproducing 1,200 a year, and you're suggesting adding 1,300 a year. I guess I'm looking for a balance there and hoping that we can come to a conclusion that that we really need to pull out all stops to produce housing, not just in Eugene, but in the entire metro area and in Lane County in general.
Yeah, that's a great question, and when we get that additional underlying detail from the state, we can certainly follow up with you all with that information.
Okay, and you may check on the presentation that we received earlier from the analyst. And I will say that, you know, I returned to the Eugene City Council after a brief absence for a 7-year absence in 2010 during the Envision Eugene process. I'd already joined in the Envision Eugene process prior to that. And it's been going on a long, long time. It's been dynamic. And I'm glad to see that we're adjusting some of those earlier projections of Envision Eugene that seemed to be under projecting our housing needs. I think we're beginning to see that that wasn't under projection, that our housing needs are far greater than was originally reported through the initial Envision Eugene process. You can comment on that if you want. That is my personal analysis. Thank you.
Yeah, the only thing I'll just add and expand on is that, yes, the way we project housing need is different than it was under Envision Eugene. Under previous state law, cities could only consider projected population growth as a part of how we plan for housing. So this new framework through the ONA says, obviously that wasn't meeting our needs, so we're going to expand how cities are allowed to and plan for housing. So it is a much more comprehensive need than we would have looked at through Envision Eugene.
Thank you. That is a wonderful explanation, which I wrote down, and I will use your explanation over and over again.
Okay.
All right, awesome. Commissioner Buck, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think I remember the last time you were back was when we were talking about urban reserves a couple of years ago now. I can't remember exactly when. And I think, I was under the impression that once we adopted the urban reserves, you could go, like, you could expand into those areas, but it sounds like that expansion into those reserves is delayed until 2030 when this is adopted. There's no way for you to do that now, is that correct?
That's correct. We have to wait until we've maximized all of our tools inside the urban growth boundary through the land studies, efficiency measures, et cetera, before we can know what that number is for our remaining need to be accommodated outside the urban growth boundary. We have pre-planned, and Rebecca, please add on, but Urban Reserves has done much of the work, but not all of the work, and it still needs to be done sequentially.
Okay, so that's being done at the same time, because you're gonna have to do another urban reserves expansion at the same time as this, is that, because once you expand in, you're gonna have to reconsider your reserves.
So we believe that we believe an expansion will be needed, but it will only be needed for part of the urban reserve land. The urban reserve land the urban reserves have more land in them than for this initial UGB expansion. So we won't need to relook at urban reserves. I believe there's a policy that that's in the Metro Plan that in 10 years after our first urban growth boundary adoption, then we should look at urban reserves again and see if we need to expand it.
I remember us putting that in
Right.
to the
Right.
board order at the time.
Right.
So I think I believe at the time, under the old methodology of determining how many units you need, there was about 8 years left of land supply available, at least what the city explained. My concern is that under the new formula, it's far less than 8 years. And this doesn't get adopted until 2030 before you can then even begin to open additional land up. And so how is the city expected to meet the 26,000 housing units if you are unable to meet the current need and unable to open the reserves for more land? And we get further and further behind within the next 5 years of you being able to actually adopt this new UGB.
Yeah, it's a great question. We talked a little bit about some of the actions that the city can take, and we'll be doing that over the next few years before we get to UGB expansion. And that's a part of the state required process. Basically, we have to look for efficiency measures of how we can basically squeeze more out of our current land supply before we go to expansion. So those are some of the tools we'll be looking at, 26, 27, all the way up to UGB expansion. So we'll look to those first as we're also doing the analysis and preparing for where we're going to expand, how that land will be designated, kind of the whole process that it takes going through to do UGB expansion. So we'll be doing both simultaneously.
So I'm very interested in what these incentives or whatever they are, because I'm very concerned that that's not meeting the need today of what the housing, demand truly is. And if your hands are technically tied until 2030 for the adoption, to me that means that there needs to be some upzoning of existing land so that you can get more multifamily or more density somehow within the city UGB that you've got. But I'm sure if there are other items, I'm very curious when you come back what those are possibly going to be. Because I truly thought at the time that you would be able, once we did the reserves, be able to expand into those areas as needed. And I think I'll just end by saying, like, I don't think this is, even though this process has changed with the governor's initiative to incorporate, the housing production strategy and it changing what you need yearly from 900 and some to 1,600 and some, the fact that it can't not be adopted or incorporated at a rate that the community needs in order to keep housing at a somewhat affordable rate, which is blown past that for years now. This is not fast enough. This process that you have to go through, although not something that you technically have any ownership over, it's still behind what we truly need as a community.
Yeah, good point.
I just want to acknowledge that we do keep hearing that in our community engagement, and you're spot on. We've heard from affordable housing developers that this is a huge number, the need is overwhelming, and we need to acknowledge how big it is in order to start tackling it piece by piece. We've also heard, aren't there process improvements you can do faster? Are there upzonings? Are there? So all of those are on the table. I just want to acknowledge that we are working with a housing and developer advocate and developer working group that has brought up a lot of these same ideas. How can we move more quickly? How can we consider other funding sources, not just incentives, but actual funding sources? And so all those things are being discussed, and I think a lot of people feel similarly.
Anyone else? Vice Chair?
Well, I just thank Commissioner Buck for bringing up the elephant in the room. I think Leah saw my face when that number came up on the screen. It's like, how are we going to get there? Commissioner Lovell and I were at NACO. This topic came up. We're not the only ones, of course. But I mean, a great comment we heard is we're so far past affordable housing, we're just looking for accessible housing. I mean, just front doors. So, yeah, appreciate you coming here and showing us this, and it's really eye-opening to see these numbers and to be taking this in right now as you're presenting. So.
Commissioner Tricker, you want to weigh in?
Sure.
Sorry.
Well, continuing on that theme, and you mentioned you had some tables of advocates and other folks bringing these same things up. So what if any, is a path to advocacy? I mean, clearly these are state issues that, and the legislature is focused on the governor's goals, which would align with an expedited and more streamlined process than what they have currently made possible for you. So my first question is, what, if any, path to advocacy? Where is the city on prioritizing advocacy to try to support some changes that we need?
Yeah, great question. Do you want to try and tackle that?
That's a complicated question.
If you want to answer and come to the table, go ahead, so the microphone can pick you up. That'd be awesome.
Thank you, Alyssa Hunter. I'm the planning director. That's a bit of a complicated question. Some of the rules that this team is working under are actually being written as they're moving forward on the project. We are in this legislative session, there's actually a number of land use bills, but they are more focused, less on this process and more focused on trying to speed up permits and land use applications. And so we are closely tracking those. This particular process, so the housing and the housing production strategies and trying to accommodate this need, it's a complicated set of statutes and rules that, again, are in process right now. Some of them are still being written, and so our team is tracking those as well. I can't really come up with one thing or something simple to say if the state would just do this, it would be quicker for us. That it's not that simple. I wish it was.
Well, I mean, you're not the only city wrestling with this, so I'm not
Correct.
saying it's up to Eugene to convince the state ledge
No.
what changes need to happen. So I guess when I ask about about that path to advocacy, I'm not just saying, you know, what's the city doing to get the state to XYZ? I'm saying like more broadly, what are the conversations amongst your cohort as cities? You know, Commissioner Seneca referenced being at NACO, the National Association of Counties. I know there's a League of Oregon Cities. Like, what are the conversations in the bigger picture that are helping to bring that perspective of cities and that pressure to bear on what is really needed? Governor and Ledge have set a goal, and then if they're doing things that create barriers to achieving their own stated goal, what's being done to?
That is a great question, and I'm going to answer that carefully. So we work really closely with League of Oregon Cities. I would say that the governor in this particular session is working more with developers and advocates than with the cities. And so I would love it if they would ask the cities what would help you, what would help your constituents in order to remove barriers to housing. And I think we're actually missing from the table at this point. A lot of the bills coming forward were not run by us, and so we're actually like it's actually challenging this session, I'll be honest.
If I could share a couple other, these are much more granular and not as sticky wickets at all. More just some clarification, because you went through a lot of slides kind of quickly. One of your slides you talked about looking ahead to meet the changing demographic or household changes. Can you just say a little more about that and what you mean by that? Because, and the reason I'm asking, one reason is, a concern is if we're making plans for a long-range future based on what household configuration looks like today, but we know that a lot of household configuration today looks the way it looks in response to housing shortages, are we not building some goals and systems that are responding to what we've created with the problem, you know, with the current problem that we're hoping to alleviate? Does that make sense? Like multi-generational, you know, people that are doubling up and college students that can't afford to move out and go, you know, out of state, so they stay home longer. That's when I see that slide, that's what I hear about demographics and household makeup and design. And so if we're building a system for the current, we're not actually building the system for a really, truly healthy, forward-moving community.
So the ONA methodology is created by the Department of Administrative Services of the state. So there's a big, long technical document that summarizes all these details, but actually, to your point, the underproduction numbers, how the state got to those is really looking at how many households didn't form for the reasons that you mentioned that could have formed, right? Folks doubling up or waiting longer to form their own households. So that's what kind of goes into that underproduction number. In terms of household and demographic changes over time, they're looking at things like an aging population. So how does that change in terms of how many people are within kind of the average household, how many kids folks are having, things like that, how our households are forming differently and how they may form differently over the next 20 years based on our demographic projections. Heather has anything to add?
We're both looking at Heather because she works really closely with the folks from PSU. They were recently in Eugene to talk to all the cities in Lane County about their methodology, and they request that information from the staff at each of the cities. So there's a pretty close relationship, I would say, between the staff that are doing the projections, and they consider what we're actually seeing on the ground, projects in the pipeline, areas that are going to be developed, but also take our questions and feedback about those very questions. So I feel like it is being addressed and is future forward looking. I think that's the goal.
Great. And then my last question / comment, you mentioned the word infrastructure, but everything's been very focused on housing units. But where in the plan is there discussion about the underpinning infrastructure, the connectivity of roadways? We're starting to hear a lot about, you know, local access roads, for example, many of which exist within, you know, that patchwork, but essentially within the UGB. Like where is conversation about assessment and planning and ultimately funding work on creating more connectivity of that kind of underpinning of sewer, road, walk and bike infrastructure for that infill work?
It's a great question. We focus a lot on housing because it's very new. This whole methodology is new. But we are, as a part of this urban growth boundary analysis, looking at all of our urban land uses. So that's housing, jobs, parks, schools, and infrastructure. So we're working with our infrastructure providers across the city to understand their future growth and development needs. That's folks at wastewater, stormwater, transportation, kind of EWEB running the gamut. So trying to understand what their needs look like. Do we need to accommodate that with additional land for any of that infrastructure? So that's a part of this overall process. The other thing I'll say is that the kind of companion to the UGB analysis is updating our city's transportation system plan. So that will happen in 2029 is when they're set to adopt the new transportation system plan. So that will incorporate some of that future looking 20-year planning. They may need to update it again the following year when we do the UGB expansion itself. So planning for the roads within that expansion area. So yes, there's a lot of close coordination between these projects.
Is there any look at possible changes? And I will preface this by saying I don't know what I'm talking about, but about annexation in the areas that are really patchwork of city, county. I know right now it's as permits are pulled, addresses are annexed, is that right?
Yeah, so our city council has been interested in and asked for work sessions on how the city can encourage more voluntary
Right.
annexation. And it was put that way because that is the current city policy to not force anyone to annex or create a situation where they are forced to annex, but to allow them to do it. And in order to do it, they have to be adjacent to city limits. And so there are some barriers.
Is that being explored? Because a permit doesn't get pulled as often, say, as a house might be sold, change ownership of, having a title, a deed transfer be
So
what
one way
triggers
we can
annexation.
encourage that is to annex public roads. And we're doing that in the Crow Road area right now. So building some infrastructure, and the city needed to annex the roadway itself and reached out to all the property owners and asked if they wanted to join the city's annexation application. And we got maybe 20 property owners to join on that. So it's a model that we could expand and look at doing for other roadways in the River Road, Santa Clara area.
Great, thank you.
Great. Commissioner Farr, you waited to weigh in. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Chair. I'm at the end of the queue. I just wanted a final suggestion on this, and I'll talk to you directly, Director Hunter, since you're at the table, and I hope that the City Manager Maderi is paying close attention to the Board of Commissioners' input. You're hearing a fairly consistent lament on our part that we're not moving forward more quickly with housing. Everybody has that same lament. But the regulatory and the process bureaucracy has always slowed the City of Eugene in its ability to swiftly adapt to swiftly changing needs. I'm hoping, I'll give you an example, that the transportation plan is going to be 2029 before that's implemented. That's 4 years from now. In the meantime, we're falling behind on both our infrastructure needs and our housing needs. And we're hoping to get what your staff has called removing barriers for development. 4 years, the transportation plan is a barrier for development. 4 years is a long time, but that's a part of the City of Eugene's slow process that I've experienced it for 10 years as Eugene City Councilor, and for now 12 years as a county commissioner. So I'm hoping and expecting that everybody feels the same urgency to act now to remove, also in words stated today, barriers to development, to provide the housing that we need, not today and not tomorrow, but we've needed compounded over decades in our community. Director Hunter, you state it's not that simple. Governor Kotek committed to providing simplicity. I'm hoping that we're all committed to providing that simplicity, to seeking simplicity and putting it in place so that we can move more quickly, so that transportation plans don't take 4 years to adopt, so that our urban growth, our urban reserves don't take 4 or 5 or 6 years to be able to do this. The governor's committed to it. I hope we're all committed to that at the local level. And I'm looking for assurance of that.
Commissioner Farr, since you were speaking directly to me, I will come back up. And I want to preface this that, I mean, we understand the significance of that need. We have felt the underproduction over the last decade. You know, as Leah mentioned before, the last time we were doing the planning and housing, we were constrained to only using the population increase and not considering the underproduction. So we're actually thrilled that we get to use this bigger number. And we are looking for ways to quickly be able to move forward with removing barriers to housing and adding incentives. I want to note that the middle housing ordinance that we adopted a couple years ago, even though it's been up and down to the Land Use Board of Appeals, has been helpful. We have seen a number of middle housing permits, like over 100 middle housing permits, over 20 land divisions, meaning we're seeing more smaller housing, we're seeing more opportunities for home ownership. So there are things happening. We're not necessarily talking to you about them right now because we're talking about this big forward-looking process, but we have been making progress in terms of more housing. And I want to assure you all that we are committed and we understand the urgency, and we are trying to do housing actions first. And so that's why the package that's being adopted next year that will come before at least the council and part of it before you will include actions for housing to ensure that we can remove some of those barriers quicker than waiting, you know, until the urban growth boundary is expanded. So I want to assure you that we hear you, we understand, and we are working towards that as well.
Director Hunter, thank you very much. I share your thrill in the rules change that allow us to move forward in a more rapid fashion. And I take this as a commitment on your part and thereby on your staff's part to provide that simplicity. I think I see you moving in the right direction. In that direction, I'm excited to work as closely as I possibly can with you. Thank you, Director Hunter. Thank you, staff.
Great, thank you. Well, it's my turn to weigh in. We beat a lot of dead horses here, so I don't want to be a party to that. I do have a couple of questions. I want to go back to slide 21 if I can.
Taking a second.
What struck me about this slide is the imbalance of where money's going to come from. Mm-hmm. So if we're looking at 57% of our 26 or whatever thousands of houses we're going to do, 60% of that is going to have to be subsidized. You use that word, and thank you for using that word. I think the affordable housing word is a word we just simply can't use anymore because of just where we're at. So I'm wondering if we're looking at that graph, what struck me is either A, if the government's not going to influx a bunch of money to help solve your problems, our problems, to get housing off the ground, then it looks to me like it's coming from the other two bars somehow, some way, in taxation or annexation or whatever word you want to throw at it. So I'm just kind of wondering where the gut check is on that, and where do we think we're going to have, I mean, what tools are we going to have to sell that going forward?
Yeah, those are all great questions. You're right. I mean, that would be a monumental increase in affordable housing subsidy to meet that need. That money doesn't exist out in our state or federal systems right now. The state is certainly looking at how they can provide more funding for affordable housing or subsidized housing. Locally, we'll need to look at if we have any new revenue sources, funding sources to support that. Other tools could be trying to put forward more, I don't want to say like naturally more affordable housing, but housing that's built to be more affordable without subsidy. So exploring different types of housing that are built to be lowercase a affordable. So certainly that's some of the actions we're looking at now in partnership with our shelter providers and affordable housing providers. But you're right, some of that housing that's built to moderate and market rate incomes, expanding our overall supply helps people move around more and find the housing that's affordable to them and their family. So yes, any increase in housing is helpful and alleviating the pressure on the whole system.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. And I think the term that we heard in Washington when Commissioner Senna and I were there was instead of affordable housing, we should start calling it attainable housing. Because at some portion, even the price or the financing or the terms or, leasing, whatever, it makes it attainable for a certain income group. So the other thing you also mentioned too was the aging population, and Commissioner Trigger brought that up too, which is a really great point about, we're planning for something now, but right now, if you look at the aging population, myself included in that figure, is the housing markets of those folks going to be addressed? Because as we're looking at that, Kate Budd told us the other day that our greatest growth in homelessness people came from aging populations. So that's a concern as well. Is that something the governor's also wrapping her head around?
So a new step in this process is we'll get this 26,000 units, and then we have work to do locally to say, what do those units look like? What are the types of housing? What are the characteristics of that housing? What locations is that housing in? Some of those characteristics are zero-step entry homes, right? Fully accessible units. Units that are near services and transit, right? The things that are based on the needs of our community members. Multi-generational living, accessory dwelling units, right? Where you can have multiple members of the family on one lot, right? So we'll be actually taking those 26,000 units and breaking it down into what types of housing are we planning for? What does the characteristics need to look like? And that certainly includes our aging population, the unique needs, moving folks out of 3-bedroom homes and giving them options that better accommodate, when their kids move out or whatever that situation might be. We don't have a lot of options, so we don't have as much movement in the marketplace as we need to accommodate kind of those changing periods of people's lives.
Yeah, good point. We have some of the best architectural designers in the country, I think. I've worked with a lot of them. And the other question I have is if we're talking about this, our hands being tied for a certain number of years, as Commissioner Buck alluded to, was I'm wondering how many developers are kind of waiting in the wings for some of this regulation to be lifted so that, to Commissioner Senega's point, we can get started and get building. I mean, do we have in my experience as building here, I'm not feeling that there's a lot of people who can actually put hammers and nails in wood that are waiting to build right now. We have a real deficit of that in this valley. So I'm wondering if your experience is different than mine.
No, I think that's right. I mean, Terry mentioned our housing and developer kind of working group. And we hear a lot, there are certainly levers the city can pull to reduce regulatory barriers. A lot of the most significant barriers are construction costs, labor costs, financing costs, right? And we have limited influence, if any, over those things. So we're hopeful that that's a priority at the state level to build the pipeline and the capacity of the state and our region to meet this need, in addition to looking at what levers the city can pull.
Okay, great. I also think of too, as we're talking about these partnerships, and again, my experience in building, you mentioned parks, and SDCs are a big part of the affordability of complexes, especially when you're talking about a multi-complex on one piece of land, when each one of those dwellings counts separately within the park system. So I'm wondering if some of our other partners out there are equally as enthusiastic as we are about trying to make things attainable. For example, let me just give you an example. Willamette Lane Park's great park system, but they're an independent elected board and increased their rates to a huge degree in this last year, which is concerning based on what we paid the park system for our last development, which I thought was pretty tough. So I'm wondering if those people are also coming to the table to become partners in this equation.
Yeah, it's a great point. We hear about SDCs a lot, certainly, and we are working with our partners in Public Works and Parks, which is all part of the City of Eugene, to talk through what our tools are. Can we defer SDCs to occupancy, right? Like, even if we're not reducing the dollar amount, are there ways we can make it more feasible for developers to make these things pencil? So it's definitely part of the conversation.
Good, awesome. And then the last thing I just want to bring up, you mentioned that the governor, you were very cautious in the words, thank you. The governor was working with developers more than working with cities, that was the comment. And so I guess my question as the county is, could the Eugene and the county do some aggressive partnership some out-of-the-box idea that would be a model for the governor, maybe that would be adopted. Does he have any? And that's just kind of a throw-out question to think about in the future. I mean, obviously, the county and I'm sure my colleagues are really wanting to get hammers and nails and boards and get some housing built. And I think beating ourselves up for the previous marks that we haven't met is counterproductive in a way. I mean, okay, the past is the past. Let's just head to the future and see what we can do to really make the impact. I think that's what we as a county want to partner with you on. And so if we can, I'd offer that as well. If we can do some out-of-the-box idea, it would be great.
Yeah, and I'll just say I think that the county and the city are both involved with the chamber in working towards addressing our housing and homelessness issues. So I think there will be, I hope, some unique projects and solutions that come out of that kind of coordinated work across the county. That strikes me that that's probably where you got the 1,200 units number from, and we are coordinating closely with them. They've had kind of the draft versions of these numbers and trying to think about how we communicate this need across the county. So yeah, certainly. We'd
Okay.
love to see that.
Well done. You're navigating some choppy waters. So thank you very much. Anything else from the board? If not, we thank you very much for your time and your energy, and we look forward to production going forward, don't we? All right. Thank you very much. All right, next up on our agenda is item 11B. It's the work session involving the Lynn Event Center Master Plan, the Community Engagement Plan, and early community input and initial visiting work group progress. So we've been waiting a while for this. This is an exciting time that I'm anticipating. We're going to do a little shuffling around here in the boardroom so we can get those appropriate. Thank you again. Appreciate it.
Situation about cultivate, Dylan Lamar.
Thank you, bye-bye.
All right, thank you, Jared.
Grow homes, cultivate Eugene grow homes.
Not on my radar. Huh?
I'll tell you when we're,
Yeah, good morning.
when we break up.
Good morning, Mr. Bueller. How are you? We've just introduced you, and your ears were burning, and you're right in. So
Sweet.
please take a seat.
Perfect.
We welcome you. Welcome your staff.
Hello.
I've never seen him in a suit.
He's looking dapper, right? Look at him go, man.
Yeah.
Ken, how are you? Good. All right, well, we've introduced the item, and whenever you get situated and set, item 11B, the master plan of the Lane Event Center is on you. And please, if anyone else wants to come to the table, it would be great. We have lots of seats. And if you have comments, it would be great to have you on the mic.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Chair, Vice Chair, and Commissioners. Appreciate the opportunity to come back and give you guys an update on our community engagement plan and have a discussion about this process and some of the next steps. So quickly, just introducing our project team. So Dan Hurley, Director of Public Works, Kelly Mason, Sales and Events Supervisor, myself, the Lane Event Center and Lane County Fair Manager. We also have Devin Ashbridge, the County PIO, who's, I don't believe, here today. And then finally, we've got, oh, good morning. Sorry. Okay. Finally, we've got Jessica Bull from Concert Strategic Planning and Communication. She's our lead consultant on this phase of the project. She'll be going over some of the material today. So just as a quick flashback, so we came back to you guys last year in March as well as in June, looking for some feedback and going over some of the past deliverables and projects that we worked on in terms of our master plan. The direction we received was to start this next phase with a focus on community engagement and high-level visioning. So we wanted to see what the community and the stakeholders value. We wanted to see what they would like us to focus on and what they would like us to provide now and for the next 20 years. So we're hoping to get to the end of this project with a clear, kind of aligned focus. Come back with some strategic initiatives to help guide the direction of the grounds, the facilities, as well as our programs. We want to keep in mind that, despite all the great ideas that we're probably going to come back with, we're not going to be able to do everything, and unfortunately, we will not make everybody happy, but at some point in time, we do have to make some decisions so that we can move forward. So we just want to kind of keep that in the back of our mind. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jessica. We have a fair amount of material to get through, and then I think some questions at the end.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having us today. We're excited to share the progress on this phase of the Lane Event Center Master Plan. As Corey said, I'm Jessica Bull. I'm part of the consultant team with Consor Strategic Planning Communications. Walker Macy is also a part of the consultant team, who's an architecture and design firm in DHM Research. So in today's presentation, we want to ground ourselves in where we're going, how we're going to get there, and then where we currently are in the process. In the first part of this presentation, we'll review this phase of work that we're implementing, review the project timeline, and we'll look at the engagement methods and tools that we'll be using in this program. We'll also review the key milestones the engagement program has already achieved. After that, we'll look at some of the key engagement pieces that we've already implemented and review the purpose of the visioning work group that has convened and the emerging values that they have begun to identify, and then dive into some of the visioning survey that just closed. That was our first engagement point. Great. So this next phase of work focuses on creating a shared vision and some initial design concepts, and creating a community engagement program. And this work will inform the plan and following stages of that process by gathering input to help determine priorities for programming, infrastructure updates, and future business and operational decisions. So as engagement professionals, we really think of the engagement program as a community conversation. Our goal is to understand what the community currently values at the Lane Event Center, what's working well, what's exciting to people, identify the needs and values, and then move forward to create that shared vision from core values and have them expressed in some community-informed site concepts. So as we go through this presentation as well, we're asking people if you're able to just hold your questions till the end and we'll get through everything. This is an overview timeline of where we're at. It's roughly in 3 phases. We're finishing out the first phase now, sort of the early community input, where we put the plan together, got our communications materials together, did some stakeholder interviews, and right into the second phase of community visions and those concepts. The third phase is we'll really take that information and refine it and put it into a workable report. So here we'll go over some of the tools and methods that this program uses. We've done stakeholder interviews with people who are really close to the Lane Event Center to understand what their perception of the needs are and their perceptions of the process in the past and what they would like to see moving forward. A critical part is the visioning work group, about a 15-member body who will collaborate with the project team on the visioning and design concepts. In terms of communications, we have a dedicated project website and branding, fact sheets and flyers. That website allows people to give direct comment into the process. And then our engagement points, the community survey, a number of open houses, and then we also have a statistically valid research survey a little bit later in the process. So we've already done a lot of work, and we wanted to go over that real quick so we can let you all know where we are currently in the process. We put together an engagement plan and our project schedule. We've completed the stakeholder interviews. We've recruited and developed the visioning work group, and they have already met twice. They're already progressing on many of the objectives that they need to meet. Project communications, and then their survey closed on the 24th, and we got 646 responses. So we wanted to touch base on the visioning work group because they're a really critical element of the engagement program. They're an advisory body, and they're going to be collaborating with the project team. They will help us define the core values and priorities, and they will also be setting the foundation and helping us come up with the vision and the design criteria. So we'll see these core values that they're working on flow right into those ultimate objectives we'd like to see with the engagement program. And so they've been invited because they have a lot of knowledge about the Lane Event Center. They're also charged with balancing that view or holding a broader view for the entire community and the Lane Event Center as a whole. So they'll really work to understand the community needs and priorities and values and, dive right in with that shared values. They'll work very closely with the design team on what those design concepts look like. And they'll evaluate those design concepts as they hear community input and also past work that the master plan has already done. So we wanted to share some of the top emerging values that are coming out of the Vision work group's progress, so you can get a sense of where it's going. So they've already done a lot of work in terms of articulating their own personal vision for the Lane Event Center, mapping what they care about and what's important for what's currently happening at the Lane Event Center, events, programs, services, and then really thinking through which values rise to the top and what we really need to be thinking about when we're thinking about the Lane Event Center for the next 20 years. So these are the very top ones. They had, a fairly robust list of values that came out of their work and also the community survey. And these are the ones that came to the very top. We have other values that may not be expressed in the vision. It doesn't mean that they're not important. They just may not live there. So we're looking at, fiscally sustainable and financial stewardship, thriving local economic engine and regional economic growth, conference and convention hub, collaborative partnerships, year-round sports and recreation opportunities, multi-use facility, a future-ready venue, and the community lifeline and emergency response hub. I think what's interesting with these emerging values, I would say most of them are aligning with what we've heard from stakeholder interviews and what we're already hearing in the survey. There's some real strong themes coming out of this work already. You know what, I'm gonna pause there because the next piece is we're gonna really dive into this community survey and we'll get a little more detailed. And I wanted to see, are there any questions on these pieces in terms of the framework of the program that we've put together, the visioning work group, or the pieces that we've already completed?
It's not a question, just a comment.
Yeah.
On the slide where you talk about the project website, if possible, listing the URL and also embedding it, because this is part of community engagement. As you presenting to us, the public watches this.
Yeah, great.
And so to say there's a community engagement opportunity through a website but not linked to it is a miss. So if we could have that slide edited and then work with folks to get that uploaded so anybody tuning in later can click on it and see that would be great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
That's great.
Commissioner Buck.
Can you remind me again who is in the visioning group again?
Yeah. We can pull up a full list of that.
Can probably go up
Is it?
by memory.
Yeah, right.
But it should be in here.
Page
It's in the body of the text.
page 6 of the report.
There's a full list of that PI plan.
Yep, on page 6.
Again, for the public, it would be good to read it out.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and read, I can read them out really quickly. So it's Devin Ashbridge, Lane County PIO, Denise Beban with Relief Nursery, also with the Ice Arena, myself, Ted Koopman, who's the Jefferson Westside Neighborhood Association rep, Liz Gallagher from Merite Hotel Management, Ann Fifield from Economic Development Manager.
City of Eugene.
City of Eugene, yep, sorry. Elizabeth Gangwer, OSU Extension Service, Dan Hurley, Director of Public Works, Kelly Mason, Lane Vet Center, Samara Phelps, Travel Lane County, Brittany Quick Warner from the Eugene Chamber of Commerce, Karen Ramos from the Lane County Home Shows, Bev Smith from Kid Sports, Commissioner Trieger, Bruce Weber, who represents Lane County Fair Board, and Ricky Woolman from the Oregon Logging Conference. So we were trying to achieve a diverse range of different types of groups that had an interest or a business relationship or a partner relationship and had different kind of views or opinions. So we tried to get a well-rounded group together. It felt like it's pretty well-rounded and it's working out well.
Yeah, well done.
Great, thank you.
And our website, in case people are listening and want to look for it, it's lecmasterplan.org. If you do a web search for LEC Master Plan, it pops right up.
Yes.
To that note, how many surveys were sent out? Out of the, we received 646. How many did we get? How many were sent out total?
How many was?
It wasn't
How
sent
many
out.
people did we send it?
Oh, okay. So it was
Oh, I
people that
see.
would go to the.
Yeah, it was a link that was
Yeah.
sent, it was a link that was sent out through various different, either social media, the news picked it up and ran a story with it. Pretty
Our
much every-
listserv,
Yeah.
Devin Astor's listserv that she had from the previous master plan.
And it was sent out to our partners, so it was sent out to Travel Lane County and the Neighborhood Association and various different groups.
And there was also a project list that from other phases where people had said that they wanted to stay on the list. That also was sent out. And that list has grown a lot with just our first engagement point. We had, I think now almost 400 emails that came out of that.
What we call an interested
we'll
parties
have a
list. Yeah.
Good audience
For various
reach.
things.
But there will be a second survey where we use a surveying firm that does that
Right.
outreach to get statistically valid.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how much interaction we get on that stuff.
Right. Any other questions or comments before we move into the community survey?
Yeah, is
Commissioner
this?
Farr's box is
sorry.
down. Do you want to make any way in there, Commissioner Farr? Are you okay?
I did raise my hand. I'm not sure if you can see that. Just to mention that the website, I was able to click onto it, and it really is a comprehensive website. Well done. It does include a list of visioning work group members. So early work on that website has been well done. Thank you.
Good, good. Please go ahead.
Okay. So the community survey results that we're going to review, before we dive in, we wanted to frame this for the group and for the public as we think about community surveys, they're often used as an initial engagement step because they can quickly engage a broad audience and they can be really useful for quickly gauging the community conversation, identifying the emerging themes, and it's a pulse check, a vibe check on what people are saying. And to any engagement tool, there's strengths and there's weaknesses. Surveys really aren't great for trying to get input on complex topics. The tool itself just does not lend respondents the ability to digest nuanced or detailed information. So we try to keep a mind to that as we look at survey work. It also, this is a community survey. It's not a statistically valid survey. So what that means is that one group of people could really flood the responses. The demographics can come across as a very narrow band, and what we see here in this one. Someone could take the survey 50 times if they, felt like they had the desire to do that. One of the reasons we do that is because we allow multiple responses from the same IP address. So people could use a community computer to take the survey. So these are just items to keep in mind when we're looking at a community survey as well. So I believe the community survey summary was passed around. It's a working draft that we're continuing to refine. All of the numbers and percentages are correct. One piece that we wanted to highlight here is the survey was a mix of multiple choice, which you will see laid out in the graphs, and then open-ended questions. Just a way I think that a summary like this is laid out, our eyes can often go to the narratives where we look at the open-ended questions and we go through and we try and categorize or theme them out. Please be aware when you're looking at that, it's typically a very small portion of the overall numbers of survey respondents. So there was one other field where, out of over 600 respondents, 60 participants gave an other. But we still go through and theme that out because we want to get our hands around what that conversation is. So we don't want to weigh it too heavily as we look through it. Thank you. So we really try and look at this as a snapshot in time. We try and approach these results with curiosity as a conversation as we try and learn, what else we need to dig into, what the community questions are, and what other information the community needs as we continue to talk with them. Great, thank you. So we're going to walk you through just quickly some of the results that come through on the graphs. And we're going to dive in here with question 4. I should state with the demographics first. We did get a narrow band of respondents, and that's typical for this type of tool, and especially sort of our first initial engagement point. We really saw white women over 65 predominantly represented in the demographics. We also saw predominantly individuals from Eugene. So we want to keep that in mind as we're looking at these results. So question 4, which pieces are the most important part of the mission? You'll see here programs that support family, youth, and community values, and the venue for community celebrations and events ranked really high, along with small business opportunities. You'll see here the visitor and convention industry is a little lower. You'll see that throughout the survey. And once we get to one of the other questions, we'll talk through that piece a little more. Okay, question 6. What are the most important elements that LEC offers our community? Again, this is a theme that's coming out, the emergency services. COVID and wildfires are still really on people's minds, and they're viewing LEC as a central hub for these emergency services. Again, opportunities for residents to gather.
Can you remind me, people could check more than one?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Up to 3.
Thank you, Kelly, up to 3. Providing youth-focused programming and the Lane County Fair are some of the top. And then this was just to gauge how important is each one to you personally. You'll see here on the bottom right, that is extremely important, the red, 53% for emergency services. Very important, 28%. So again, emergency services are really rising to the top. You see the providing youth-focused programs, it's aligning with question 4, and then opportunities for Lane County to gather. Another notable one is being centrally located in downtown Eugene, about 65%. That felt important to people.
It's kind of surprising.
Now, question 8. So I think here in question 8, how generally satisfied or dissatisfied are you with the LEC in providing the items below? One thing I want to highlight here is the number of unsures. And as we look at this, that feels positive to us because no one person is going to interact with the LEC in a 360 view, right? They may go to the fair, they may go to an event, they may use the ice rink. So, many people who they just simply didn't know about that topic chose unsure. And then what we see again, some items rising to the top. People were satisfied, to somewhat satisfied of being centrally located in downtown Eugene. The Lane County Fair also, people felt very satisfied with that. And then again, we see the emergency services, about 65%. And then how well do you feel the current events, programs, and services currently align with community needs? We're here at somewhat well to neutral to very well. Overall, fairly positive. I would say that this is something that we can dive into. You know, what improvements, what future growth do people want to see? And then question 10. So we framed question 10 as sort of assuming that things will be upgraded because we know that that's a need at the site and didn't want people to trip up in their sort of visioning thinking about what those upgrades might be, but to think a little broader about the areas that could grow or new things that could be presented. Again, we see emergency services fairly high and a place to gather. Programs and spaces for youth and sports, partnerships with the community, and then enhancing LEC as a central hub in downtown. We see local businesses, sort of entertainment and travel and tourism industry a little bit on the lower end there. Well, let's just see something. Actually, before we switch back to the other deck, I wanted to see if people had any initial comments or questions with the sort of broad level questions we put in the survey.
Commissioner Farr, your box is not up. Is your hand up, just out of curiosity? No. Okay.
Chair, thank you.
Anyone else want to weigh in yet? All right. I guess we're going to hold some questions for later.
Okay, great. So next, we just wanted to touch base on some of the broad themes that came out. All right. All right. And we're continuing to articulate some of these, but we saw support for emergency services and community resilience. We do want to note that in this survey, sort of the emergency disaster and sort of health and human services emergency were combined, right? They were put in one category. Expanding sports and recreational facilities, enhancing arts, culture, and community event. I would say this theme is something on the newer side that the survey unearthed that maybe we didn't hear in stakeholder interviews, we didn't really hear from the work group. There's a lot of appetite for cultural events, art shows. This is something that may or may not land in the vision, but could certainly inform program choices and what we see at the LEC. Economic growth and business development. And then we wanted to highlight sort of the comments over land use and future development. When you look at those other comments and the open-ended comments, this is a conversation we know that has gone on in the community, but it's a rather broad topic in the way that we gathered it. And we had individuals who really wanted to see housing there, mixed-use space. We had individuals who thought low-income housing could be a priority. Others who thought perhaps the fair should move or the LEC could be relocated. But we wanted to sort of call that out, that the category is very broad. We heard many, many things within that. Okay. And then we just wanted to briefly touch on our next steps. We're going to be working towards the development of a vision and the initial site concepts with the work group, and then we'll be bringing those out to the public. We have public open houses scheduled for April and May, and then this statistically valid survey will be kind of diving into some of that. We'll also be back to the board in, I believe, May, June, and then finally in July, we'll have a final report for you all.
Okay, monthly
Yeah.
update, looking forward to it.
Great.
Any other questions or comments or on the board on this? I got a few. Somebody wants to lead off? Commissioner
My
Fart.
hand is raised now, Chair. Thank you.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to say that in looking at the visioning work group members, in whom we place a great deal of trust, clearly, to represent the Board of Commissioners and to bring us very well thought through recommendations. I am really satisfied personally with the membership of the visioning work group. I think you've done a good job of addressing the broad community. But I'm going to point out there are a couple of people on there whose membership maybe is a little bit more weighted than others. People who represent the opinions of fairly large boards of directors. And the one I'll point out in particular is Samara Phelps, who represents Travel Lane County. Travel Lane County has a very large board of directors, which is very vocal, very interested, and very engaged in the current and future use of the event center properties. So as the work groups move forward, can you tell me how the participation is, or what means do we have to make certain that all members participate at a fairly equal level, and that those who represent boards are given a chance to represent what their board is directing them to bring forward?
Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about the facilitation of that work group. We try and use different tools and activities along with discussion for those work group members to give input. So we'll certainly have a facilitated group discussion, but then in those group activities, people will, split into small groups and work through the issues. One of the reasons we do that is to make sure that there's different ways that we're getting input in that work group. And it, provides a balance, and it also provides individuals who have different learning styles, different ways to contribute to the group. And a big piece of that is also, making sure that the discussion that they're having is facilitated, but also, the work group agreed to a charter, and there we have ground rules about step up, step back. We have an ask of them to, while they're bringing maybe their professional expertise, to take a step back and hold a broader view. So that is part of their charge as being a work group member.
Thank you for the response. Once again, I'm really pleased with the distribution in the work group. I'm glad to see Ted Koopman representing Jefferson West Side neighbors being there, the most closely affected group of citizens in the county, of course. And I'd want to thank you, Commissioner Lori Trieger, for being a part of not just the Fair Board, but part of this work group, very well representing the Board of Directors. Excuse me, the Board of Commissioners.
Yes. Commissioner Trigger.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Commissioner Farr. I'll just sort of pick that baton up and appreciate that. And I try to participate a little less than I might, because ultimately this board is going to be the board that's going to get the recommendations and decide what to do with them. But it's really interesting for me to be there and listen. And I think one of the challenges the work group will get to, and our facilitator is who will be tasked with helping us, is reconciling sort of the survey results with the interests or perspectives of any given work group member or constituency. Because it's so fascinating to me in this first pass of survey that clearly, again, a very small and not statistically valid sampling, but still consistent and clearly, the community that responded to the survey sees this as the local community's resource. There was very little priority about attracting people from outside of the area and sort of tourism events. Now, events that benefit local people do attract tourists, but that perspective of, and it's a public asset, it belongs to the public, and the public is the local community in this case. That's our jurisdiction, is people in Lane County, and people in Lane County see this as their space, and there will be people in the work group who have other ideas. So it's going to be sort of reconciling or value adding to that. I think that's the other big challenge that we're already experiencing in the work group is staying really focused on the visioning means creating enough of a sense of big picture, so when specific projects or opportunities or resources come available, we know they can tag to that vision appropriately. This is not a table, this work group, to say, we think this building should be fixed up first, or we think this is a specific program that needs to happen. It's this broader sense of eventually when we make those decisions, are those decisions going to resonate with the will and the interest of the public that owns the facility? And that's a really difficult but important distinction that I can feel us wrestling with. People kind of getting there in different pace timing. And the last thing is the interest in cultural events. I mean, we sort of accomplish that. The community accomplishes that on our behalf by who chooses to rent the facility and host events. And so that's something I'm thinking a lot about and we might want to look to is how to make it make people more aware that it's available for other organizations or jurisdictions within Lane County to use it for their cultural events to satisfy that need that the community is expressing, rather than it always being generative from Lane County itself to fulfill that. And that I imagine when we get to design conversations, that's something those folks will help us with, bringing in more of a sense of place through arts and culture at the site, even if it's not events.
Yes, Vice Chair.
Yeah. It kind of along with what Commissioner Trieger's saying, I thought about it is, so I don't know exactly the makeup. What's the Fair Board's part in this, role in this?
So the Fair Board is in charge with the operation and planning for the Lane County Fair. It's an ORS dictate that we have a Fair Board and operate a county fair. The agreement that we have between the Fair Board and this board is that they are in charge for the fair, the week of fair, and the planning of the fair, but the rest of the year we work through Lane County. So we're a division of Public Works, and we try to model most of the things that we do through all the policies and procedures through that. The fair has some of its own, but even most of those are modeled off of the Lane counties as well. So they're an advisory board the rest of the year because they do have some knowledge and expertise in terms of the history in the past, but technically they're just in charge of the fair.
And the Fair Board president is on the vision work group, Bruce Weber. So that's the direct involvement with the Fair Board, if that was your question. That's kind of the extent of it.
Perfect.
They get updates at the meetings.
Yeah, and we update them at each meeting as well.
Well, and I was kind of, looking through the surveys and just being a rural commissioner and thinking that I don't know if maybe the 4-H group and some of them are going to necessarily know the surveys out there, but I mean that really helps having Bruce Weber on there because I know they get those concerns and stuff.
Extensions on there too.
And the OSU extension was on there, and so we do know that it went out to their membership. Yeah.
Good, excellent, perfect.
Yes, Commissioner Buck.
I'll just say that the result of it being a location for emergency services doesn't surprise me at all. People in Eugene know it's the space that Egan is in the winter. In rural communities, obviously we've had them go there during wildfire season events. And so the good thing about that is we can incorporate that probably in a variety of different ways to meet the needs of the community for these other things that are rising to the top as well. We were able to get congressionally directed funding for improvements to the fairground, and funding from the state for that is helpful too. I really like the way that you're approaching this master plan and knowing that surveys aren't the be end all of what we want to do, and then have key people that really understand the community and are really involved in the community and want to see truly what's the best thing to do there. The thing that I'm not sure is being as widely presented is there's no funding for any of these things. There just isn't. And I hate to be a downer, but like the fact is, finding the funding for whatever the community wants to do will take substantial time and effort after the fact. And it really does depend, I think, on if what we put there is an asset that generates income back into the fairgrounds. If it's something that isn't going to do that, or continues to be in the state that it is, we're not going to be able to really financially make it happen. So when we're incorporating the ideas of the work group and the community, how are you factoring in part of the education, this financial aspect? If we incorporate some kind of, some of these ideas, it might change the minds of people of which ones generate income, which ones do not generate income, in order to make the ideas happen.
Yeah, that's obviously the unfortunate piece is there is not a magical pot of money that can do everything that we want. So that will be coming in, especially through the visioning group. We didn't want to start with that because we didn't want to, set people down the road with, we're not going to be able to do anything, grand. So we still want the grand ideas, but that will be coming in through that group. And we will be going through the process of, okay, well, now how do we fund it? Or is it one that generates revenue and can help fund itself, and so on and so forth. So that will be coming through that group. So we're still going to take the big ideas and everybody's thoughts, but then we're going to have a realistic discussion about it. And I would anticipate that when we come back with, another update, you guys will probably get some of that information already.
Great. I'm glad that you're planning on that.
Yeah.
I would just say, at maybe our first meeting, the work group got a sort of overview of what it means to be an enterprise fund and how the Lane Event Center fits into the county budget, and that you'll note that financial stability and fiscal stewardship were at the top of the list from the work group. I wouldn't expect the community to be like, make sure it's, this is not where they're thinking. They're thinking programmatically and aesthetically, and that makes sense, but those two things will have to come together. But the other thing is lots of little things happen where little bits and pieces of money come together that can create improvements that then make us able to be more competitive, say, as a rental facility, like some of the improvements to Wheeler that we've made. I don't know if you've been lately. We've completely redone the bathrooms. They're great. They're beautiful. That makes it a better facility that increases our ability to generate revenue. So there's lots of little sort of bits and pieces that are happening that don't rise to the level of shout it out. But I think that, so we're like working at that micro and that macro.
Yep.
And this plan will help us direct where to put even those smaller things that eventually add up to help us generate more revenue.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sure.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for acknowledging me. It's hard to unsee things, and so that's a great perspective too, because when I'm looking at this through a funding lens, and when I'm taking notes, I'm like, okay, I'm seeing a theme. It's youth, it's sports, it's family. We got to do a sports facility, and you look at sports, and they survived 08. They survived the pandemic, and parents are willing to invest in kids to keep them in their sports. So that's what I'm looking at, is generating what would be best. Of course, Medford came to mind, and then next was music festivals. I mean, those are huge. Well, then Redmond came to mind, and so I like that perspective of maybe not bringing out the elephant in the room again, that how are we going to do this, but to keep people's perspective out there, and what should we do, what would we like to see, not what can we afford to do. So I really like the way you led with that. Thanks.
Yeah, and I think that when we start diving into some of those details, thinking about it from multi-use perspectives. That's been the thing that we've been talking about now for several years. Some of our buildings just weren't designed really to be used as they're being used. They are not really multi-use. They're very restrictive in the types of things that you can do in them. Anything that we do, whether it's a renovation, whether it's a replacement, whether it's something new, the more multi-use that we can focus on, the better off we're going to be, because then it can house a shelter 1 week and turn around and have a volleyball tournament the next week, and then it can turn around and be a business show the next week. And then, so the more multi-use that we can create our facilities or renovate them, the better chance we'll have to generate additional revenue, additional uses, and incorporate what we think will be some of these high-level priorities that are coming from the community.
Thank you.
Yeah, great, awesome. I had a couple, I mean, obviously you hit the target with the elephant in the room question. My question in the middle of that was how close are we hitting the target and how far are we missing potential due to lack of funds? That was just kind of my underlying thing. The other thing I was thinking about too, and you mentioned, and I say this with no disrespect whatsoever, but you said, Jessica, you said this. You said that predominantly the survey was white women over 65 was the bulk of that 646 responses. So I'm thinking, okay, well, we've got a little bit of information. Obviously, we're going to get a lot more information. I mean, generally speaking, that predominant demographic's not interested in Drift Fest or a Metallica concert. So, we're going to have some other input from that as well. But I did think it was interesting that a good 2/3 of the people liked the whole location idea. So the whole, thing that I thought when I first got on board here was let's move the fairgrounds and do something different with that. So if the community is saying, look, this is an asset that we want to make something to, as Commissioner Buck said, to have a multi-use thing where it pays, and Commissioner Soniga has, multi-use kind of things that attracts more uses. I'm wondering if we have a marketing plan in the future. I mean, if people don't know about it, like they said, they can't rent it. And I'm wondering how much of a budget maybe we might want to look at throwing some money in as advertising a little bit beyond our borders. Is that something we've talked about?
So for the budget that you guys will be getting soon or through the budget committee, there is some money put aside for kind of a next step planning. We're anticipating either a business plan or marketing plan or some combination of some of that work. So, we're thinking that there could be some program themes that come out of this, of certain things that we need to maybe try to look at adjusting in terms of adding some opportunities for local communities to have better access, or nonprofits, or whatever it may be. So yeah, we already have some set aside in professional consulting for this next fiscal year to probably take a dive into one of those. We just didn't want to identify which one it was yet. We wanted the process to go through the process.
In the process of redesigning our website to lend itself to that business plan in the future, while also making it ADA accessible.
Right.
And
Right.
for the record, well, on that, do you want to just put into the record how many event days there are at the site? Because I think part of marketing is people don't know what is happening, not just what's available. People think it sits vacant except during the fair. So just to tack onto that might be good to get out.
Well, I mean, the line of that question was like, is there some thing that we haven't thought of going forward that maybe we could, rather than a big, grand, huge multi-use centers, or some other thing that we could invest in that would drive that momentum? And, I see Ken Evans in the room, and obviously him and I've talked hockey, and, worst case scenario, we make a hockey community out of the middle of that. So we have two big venues where people can gather in an emergency, and perhaps we pepper it with some residences or somehow, and we make a community more out of it, and an event center. So, I mean, that's just kind of where my mind's gone. Is I think it's great that everything's on the table and nothing is excluded yet. So I think the visiting process going forward's got a lot of potential. So, anyone else want to weigh in? Mr. Hurley, you good?
Good, very
Okay.
good.
All
Jessica
right.
and our consulting team and the process so far.
All right, sounds good. All right. If there's nothing else for the order, thank you very much for the presentation. We look forward to the monthly updates from, as you said, May, June, and July, or April, May, June.
Yep, as soon as we get some information out on the open houses, obviously you guys are invited to come to those, but there'll also be some material that'll be coming your way as well.
All right, super, awesome.
Thank you guys, appreciate your time and support.
Yes, sir, that's what we're here for.
Exciting stuff.
All right, if there's anything else good for the order, we are going to adjourn. Our next meeting is going to be Tuesday, March 18th at 9 a.m. in Harris Hall. We are adjourned.
For example, we're replacing the floor.